To those waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It's 11:31. Lottie Morley is here now with your headlines. It's 11:35, and the time is rather more important on this morning's programme than it usually is, because with every passing minute, the story appears to shift. If you tuned in at 10 o'clock this morning, you'll have heard me for an hour and a half with some superb contributors wondering what Liz Truss will do to get out of the tight corner in which she finds herself. And there were three options: a complete U-turn, i.e. to pretty much abandon everything in that ludicrous mini-budget; a partial U-turn, which would essentially involve the abandonment of Rishi Sunak's plan to increase corporation tax to 25% in the spring; or do nothing at all, keep calm and carry on. The score, when I stopped counting because I just forgot, the score was 3-2 to the partial U-turn. So well done. It is now fairly well established that there is going to be a partial U-turn. The Telegraph reports that the corporation tax rate will rise to 25% in the spring. Now, I don't expect you to be too worried about me, but of course that means I can't carry on with the conversation I was having, and I don't really want to talk about anything else except the unfolding political shenanigans that are occurring in the United Kingdom. So I can't carry on with the question I was asking because it has already been answered. So here's what I thought we'd do next. Okay, well, with this partial U-turn, surely Liz Truss has to sack Kwasi Kwarteng. Is there any way that Kwasi Kwarteng can possibly survive? So that's the plan. I think I'll just run that by the political editor Theo Usherwood live on air and see what he thinks about the plan for the second part of the programme today. Theo, what do you reckon? I would do a vote on it. We could have texts coming in. We could have a poll on Twitter. Can Kwarteng survive? Should Truss get rid of him? You like it?
I think that's probably the way you should head, James, because I'm multitasking whilst I'm in the presenter chair, copying you, and I've just been I've just been WhatsApping with my contacts in number 10, and is Kwasi getting the sack? Do you know what the reply was?
Go on.
I can't answer that.
Okay.
Read into that what you want. Look, the Times are reporting that the Chancellor has been.
Well, I can't
sacked.
do it as a topic then, can I? The Times are reporting that he's gone.
Well, I was trying to be
upbeat.
Encouraging. I was trying to weave you into the story.
I'm only in Birmingham. Mate. Don't speak as if I'm in some sort of outer ring of civilization. It's beautiful here.
I know, Birmingham's a stunning city. I was in there only a couple of weeks ago.
For the Conservative Party conference, that's probably what Liz Truss would call the good old days.
Your words, not mine.
Yes.
But the point I'm making is that it does, from my reading, what I'm getting is that it does appear that the Chancellor is in the process of being deposed of his duties.
So he's landed. He's got back to the office, and his sandwiches have been wrapped. So do you think there's a box outside the office with this computer in it? And I bet he's got some of those ball bearings. You know, the clicky ball bearings on strings that go click, click, click. Do you know the ones I mean?
Yeah.
It's all in a cardboard box waiting for him outside the office. When might we expect that to be confirmed? Stephen Swinford at the Times is very, very unlikely to have gone with this unless he is absolutely certain of his sources.
We'll have it. I'm sure we'll have it confirmed fairly shortly.
Before the press conference?
Yes.
Before Sheila Fogarty gets into the studio?
You want something for your show, basically.
Well, I kind of do. I mean, at the moment, I feel like Jeff Stelling. This is like Soccer Saturday. I'm getting results in from all. I just need Chris Kamara to come along and tell us that Kwarteng's finally got the chop.
Yes. Okay. Who's going to be Harry Redknapp?
I don't know. Who would be in the frame to replace him then?
I think one of your callers just then said, James, that they didn't think it was Rishi Sunak wouldn't take the job. And I'm not saying that Rishi Sunak would take the job. I don't think he will take the job. But what I would say is that you would expect it to be somebody from his camp who would be promoted to Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Because otherwise it's a doubling down even as they undertake a U-turn. It's a simultaneous U-turn and double down, which is unheard of.
The point is that Liz Truss, when she appointed her cabinet, as we've discussed previously, was of the opinion that she didn't want anybody who hadn't backed her campaign to be Prime Minister early doors to be part of her cabinet. The obvious casualty to, of course, mention with all of that was Grant Shapps, who was described by Liz Truss as being a good communicator, but, it was impossible for him to keep his job as Transport Secretary. So Anne-Marie Trevelyan was put into that post. So, of course, as you say, things have changed significantly, and therefore and Liz Truss's power has ebbed away.
I'm not. Hang on. Forgive me. I am listening. I promise. But who are we putting on the list of possibles? Grant Shapps?
No.
Oh,
I'm saying,
Michael Green?
Okay, you want a name?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying. This is.
I'm no pressure, mate. No pressure. It's not a prediction. It's a speculation.
Things are moving quite quickly. So what I don't want to do is
Larry, the Downing Street cat.
No, somebody like Sir Mel Stride.
Mel Stride, so chair of the Select Committee, the Treasury Select. He's had a very good game, hasn't he, over the last month?
And of course the campaign manager of Rishi Sunak. I'm not saying it's not an obvious name, and I'm just saying somebody of that ilk who comes from that part of the party.
This is nuts. It's nuts. I think you're probably right, is that she's going to have to hire someone who completely disagrees with the policy that she's just abandoned and did so publicly, or at least very obviously believed so in private. But how can she survive? We've done so well with our analogies this week. There is no analogy for this. It's a bit like...
Well, I'm sure
it's a bit like the fire brigade hiring an arsonist. No, it's a bit...
No.
It's the other way around. It's like the Arsonist Liberation Front hiring the head of the fire brigade. That's all right. That works.
So if you imagine there's a boat that's sunk.
Right.
Can I try an analogy?
Yeah, let's do this. Remember what chair you're sitting in.
Yeah. So there's a boat that's sunk.
It's the throne of analogies that you're sitting in, the analogy throne.
There's a boat that's sunk, and it's in the middle of the Atlantic.
Right.
And Liz Truss is on a raft. She's on a raft. It's a piece of
flotsam.
Planks.
Flotsam.
Yeah, exactly.
She's on flotsam.
And she's on and she's safe.
Yes.
And up swims Kwasi Kwarteng. And he says, Liz Truss, please, I need to stay on. I want to get on the raft.
Yes.
I need to get on the raft. Please save me.
This is Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet at the end of Titanic, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And Liz Truss is making the decision, James, that if she allows Kwasi Kwarteng onto the flotsam, the flotsam is going to sink and they're both going to be goners. But if she lets Kwasi Kwarteng sink to the bottom of the deep, never to be seen again.
Yeah.
Well, of course he's going to be seen again. He's just going to be on the back benches.
No, it's just an analogy. Don't worry.
But he sinks to the bottom of the deep.
Yes.
And Liz Truss stays on the flotsam.
Yes.
And of course it's in the middle of the Atlantic.
But someone else has to get on with her.
No.
Oh.
She'll survive.
Yeah, but she needs
somebody else is going to come along. Mel Stride's going to come on a different piece of flotsam. Maybe Mel Stride will come in a dinghy.
So there's two planks now.
But no.
Yeah.
You're just being...
There's Liz Truss on one plank.
There's
Liz Truss on one plank and Mel Stride on the other plank.
I didn't do this to you with Lamborghinis.
Speaking of two planks, what's Nadine Dorries up to?
Oh, no, we're not doing the... This is unfair. She's... no, let me check. Sorry.
Memo to self, stop laughing at your own jokes. So, okay, I understand. So Kwarteng, we're pretty confident, has gone. The question of who will replace
I've been told by somebody else, a very well-placed source. So I'm just literally, as you're making jokes at my expense.
It's not making jokes at your expense. I'm embellishing your analogies.
As you're making jokes at my expense, I've just had another text from somebody who knows everything.
So we'll get you back on when it's been confirmed.
Gone.
Okay, he's gone. So but that is still not actually coming out of Downing Street officially, but unofficially, the Chancellor. How many days was that, Theo, off the top of your head?
So the Chancellor was appointed on September the 6th, in the evening of September the 6th, because it was Monday. So that is... what's the date today? 14th. So that is a month and 8 days. So that's 30 plus 8, 38 days.
38 days, of which, of course, most was taken up with the dealing with the...
You want to take 10... If you want to say, well, because of Her Majesty the Queen, and the fact that Her Majesty the Queen has, obviously there's a period of national mourning, you can take 11, I think it's 11 days out of that. So you can then whittle it down to 27 days of actual... Is
that a record, or was it... I know one fella passed away, didn't he, in the 70s, I think, or the 60s. Is that the shortest? Oh, no, would that be the shortest ever? It doesn't really matter, does it? Anyway, so we'll talk to you again when it's official.
But the other thing just to add is that at least Kwasi Kwarteng got to deliver some sort of mini budget.
Yes.
Whereas Sajid Javid, when he was in post as Chancellor, didn't even get to do that.
Nor did Nadeem Zahawi.
No.
He was Chancellor for 10 minutes, don't forget that.
So we've had two Chancellors and, well, three Chancellors if you want to say a full budget, three Chancellors in the last 12 years who haven't actually got to deliver a budget.
But they all know what they're doing. I'll ask you this question as well, because Louise, I don't think understood its full impact when I asked her. Does this mean that Liz Truss has now joined the anti-growth coalition?
I think
I'll leave you to ponder that. It's 11:45. 11:48 is the time. The year of the four chancellors. What was the year of the four emperors? Vespasian was the fourth. Was it 89 AD? I forget. I mentioned to you that I was doing an event at a festival, the Bewdley Festival. I had a lovely time last night, and the questions were astonishing. They were so erudite. And one of them said, in 89 AD, there was the Roman Empire, the year of the four emperors. Do you think this might be the year of the four prime ministers? And the suggestion was that it would go Johnson, Truss, Mordaunt, Starmer. And I said, no, I don't think it would be. But I think we will now be in the year of the four chancellors, won't we? We started the year with Sunak. And then it was Zahawi, and then it was Kwarteng, and now it is going to be someone else, and we haven't got a clue who. Listen, if you're just joining me, I've got a bit of news for you, right? The key platform upon which Liz Truss campaigned to become leader of the Conservative Party and therefore Prime Minister will be publicly abandoned by Liz Truss at 2:00 today. But I think the major part of her policy promise to Conservative members that she would call off Rishi Sunak's mooted increase in corporation tax has now been abandoned by the woman who beat Rishi Sunak. Just let that sink in for a moment. I'll give you a second. And her co-conspirator has been fired. So the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who announced the mini-budget that delivered on the promise that got her elected as leader of the Conservative Party and therefore Prime Minister, has been fired by the woman who got elected as party leader and therefore Prime Minister upon a promise not to bring in Rishi Sunak's increase in corporation tax. She's bringing in the increase in corporation tax and she's firing the bloke who announced that she would actually be delivering upon the promise that she made while campaigning. I'm going to pause again to let that sink in. Because this is not normal. On a less important note, I don't really have a phone-in at this point in proceedings. I had a cracking phone-in underway about whether or what sort of U-turn she would undertake, what sort of U-turn might work, whether she would do a U-turn if you want to, stay calm and carry. I was going so well. The calls were queuing up. The quality of contribution was incredible. People in the city, and that fell apart, of course, the minute it was announced that she is actually going to do a massive U-turn. Sorry, technically another massive U-turn. And so then I thought, well, then we've got a cracking phone in here. We can do a conversation. We can have a conversation about whether Kwasi Kwarteng's situation has now become untenable, whether Liz Truss has any choice but to throw him under the bus. And then it was announced that Liz Truss would, in fact, or at least it was reported, and it's being reported everywhere now, that Liz Truss was indeed going to throw Kwasi Kwarteng under a bus. So that phone-in disappeared over the horizon before I'd even taken a single call. It's like a conspiracy to ruin my day. I could comfortably carry on talking about the news and the various ramifications until Sheila Fogarty gets here at 1:00, but we've got an hour and 8 minutes before that happens, and I'm conscious you may not want me to speak uninterrupted, and yet I don't want anything else. I don't really want to talk about anything else on the programme. The environmental protester who threw tomato soup at a Van Gogh painting would in normal circumstances distract me for a moment or two because I remain fascinated by the things that actually get on our nerves as opposed to engender support. But it would be entirely inappropriate at a time of national crisis like this to talk about anything except the national crisis. So what question do we ask? The obvious one is, of course, can Liz Truss possibly survive this? But the only people who can really answer that are Conservative politicians, and they don't really queue up to call this particular radio entertainment programme. And they're the ones that are going to, and probably it's too early for them even to say. They're going to have to see what impact these two big moves today, the abandonment of the policy that got her elected and the abandonment of the bloke who announced the policy that got her elected, are going to do to both, most immediately to the markets, to the pound and the rest of it, and latterly, of course, to the opinion polls, which are currently showing historical, genuinely historical deficits for Liz Truss. No Prime Minister in history has recorded a lower approval rating than the one that she is currently scoring. And that was before she abandoned the policy that got her elected as leader and then abandoned the man who announced the policy that got her elected as leader. So, I mean, can Liz Truss survive? Almost seems too simple. It's almost a rhetorical question, isn't it? But I'll ask it. Can Liz Truss possibly survive this? You're only allowed to talk to me if you voted Conservative at the last election. And you go straight to the front of the queue if you're a Conservative member who voted for Liz Truss during the leadership election. 0345 6060 973. For everybody else, I'm going to invite you to do what I do. All right? That's all. I am going to invite you to just reflect with me on air on what is actually happening before our very eyes. I don't really even want to do the why of it at this point in proceedings. I'm sure colleagues later in the day, Sheila and Tom, will be addressing the why of it or the how could this happen or similar questions, because they generally come back now to the same source, don't they? I say, how the hell could this happen? And we say, well, it's because the fundamental lie of Brexit has polluted everything that followed, the corruption of objective truth and ignorance of reality, the rise of complete no-marks like Andrea Leadsom, who got a damehood yesterday, and Gavin Williamson is the mark of a political party and therefore governments that are built upon lies and incompetence, denials of reality. Or we talk about the absence of empathy that underpins all their other policies, or the refusal to accept reality. And it's not dull, but it does flirt with repetition, and I don't want repetition on the programme. So just reflect on what's happening. How is it making you feel? One of the great curses of empathy is the dilution of schadenfreude that it delivers. If you take empathy and patriotism as the mark of a true liberal, then you can't take much pleasure in the collapse of your political enemies or the travails of your political enemies, because A, it's bad for the country that you love and the country that you live in. And B, of course, you can, if you're built like I am, you can almost end up feeling sorry for the people that have visited these horrors upon us. So that notion of a circular firing squad being a spectator sport is only really true for right-wingers. They revel, of course, in the misfortunes of their enemies properly, and left-wingers do as well, of course. You know, I'm thinking about the extremities of both political positions, but those of us in the centre, whether slightly to the right or slightly to the left, whether, you know, in out, or shake it all about, the abiding memory you have after you've got over the initial sugar rush of shock is that this is our country. This is where my children are going to grow up. This is where I hope to see out my days. And these people who since 2016 have been absolutely trashing it while claiming to be the patriotic ones, they haven't finished yet. It's just another chapter in a catalogue of entirely self-inflicted, predictable and avoidable chaos. I thought last night that the way to understand it, and this is box fresh, so it may fall apart when I actually expose it to fresh air, but I thought last night that the way to understand this is about the distance between a promise made and a verdict delivered. So if there is a big gap between when you make the promise and when it can be fairly assessed whether or not that promise was true or not, you can get away with it. So the gap between Brexit promises and promise delivery is huge, and they keep expanding it as well, don't they? They keep saying things like, oh, we haven't had a proper Brexit yet, or well, finally Liz Truss will deliver a real Brexit. I think I read those words in the Daily Telegraph comment pages not long ago. What's the Mail going to do? The Mail went with finally a real Tory budget. What are they going to do now that it's been almost completely abandoned? Like I care. So the gap between the promises is miles apart with Brexit. With this, the gap was hours. You know, Liz Truss said, we'll do this, it will deliver growth. It was a promise. But the verdict was delivered hours later when it ended up delivering the opposite in the short term. So think of it like a triangle. And at the base of the triangle, you've got the Brexit promises, and then miles away from the Brexit promises, you've got the fair assessment of whether or not any of those promises are going to come true. Spoiler alert, they haven't, they're not, and they never will. But there's enough of a gap there. It's 6 years already to take the edge off it, take the kind of sting out of the tail. But when you move forward up that triangle with the gap between promises and delivery narrowing at every turn, you end up very close to the peak of the pyramid where Liz Truss says growth, 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 and the markets say no, no, no. And that's why it's broken. Is it completely broken? I think it has to be, doesn't it? I think it has to be. I can't see how anybody can continue to govern when look, there's 52% of Liz Truss's premiership is built upon sustaining the Brexit lies and being continuity Johnson. 48% of it is built upon promising tax cuts, promising to halt Rishi Sunak's increase in corporation tax, promising tax cuts for the highest earners. She's now abandoned the two biggest parts of that policy platform and defenestrated the bloke whose crime was simply to deliver what she had already promised. I can't see how she can continue in the post. But I'm not a Conservative MP. I haven't spent the last 6 years undertaking myriad contortions in order to convince myself that up is down, black is white, and reality is not what we can see with our eyes and ears, but it's what people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson keep telling us it is. So how does this end? What happens next? How does this develop? You don't know and I don't know. And the funniest thing, and perhaps the scariest thing of all, is that none of them have got a bloody clue either. The time is approaching 12 noon. The question that we will address in the next hour is not particularly specific or pithy. It's merely a congregation of concerned citizens. I hate what's being done to our country. I've hated it for 6 years. How are you processing the latest self-inflicted disaster? And can you see any light at the end of the tunnel? Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive, which could pretty much sum up UK politics since David Cameron called that ludicrous referendum. But we're just examining the latest disasters, the latest U-turns, the latest firings. If you're just tuning in, if you've been doing something different this morning, then the Chancellor's on his way out, and the policy that got Liz Truss elected as leader of the Conservative Party has been abandoned by Liz Truss. And that policy was, of course, to abandon a policy that had been previously announced by the man she beat in that election to increase corporation tax in the spring to 25% from its current level of 19%. What do you make of it all? Call me now. Ollie's in Watford. He did. What do you make of it all, Ollie? What's going on?
You know, I almost feel sorry for Just Stop Oil. What are they got to do to get some headlines these days?
I've thrown tomato soup all over Van Gogh sunflowers, and everyone's just going, meh. What about? Let's get back to the politics.
Third hour. They were going, you know what? I've got my eyes on the third hour on the James O'Brien show. But no,
sorry, lads.
Liz said no.
Love it. Go on.
You also need to be very careful, James, because we all know what happened when Ben Kentish got the presenter seat.
Yes, I know. Theo's there. I know. Do you know there's a famous story, a little bit of light relief, because there isn't any actually breaking news since the bulletin. There's a famous story in newspaper circles about a gossip columnist who was working for Nigel Dempster no, it's the other way around. Nigel Dempster was the deputy on a gossip column at the London Evening Standard, and the boss went to Ascot for the day, and you're supposed to file a page from Ascot, and Nigel Dempster had prepared an entire column of stories that he'd saved up over the previous month that were much better than anything coming in from Ascot. And he went to the editor and said, look, I think this might be better than what we're getting off my boss. And he nicked his job as a consequence. That's what Theo Usherwood is doing in the studio
he's
today.
Conniving.
He's up to something. He's on manoeuvres, Ollie. I can't believe it. Unbelievable.
So I was on hold long before Kwasi decided. Well, no, before Liz decided that Kwasi was a goner. Because so looking at the betting markets, for example, yes. I mean, you said 8-1 yesterday on Truss. She's now about 2-1 to be won this year.
She was 4s yesterday. She was 7 or 8 at the beginning of the week when some people may have placed large bets.
And Kwasi yesterday was 3-1.
Was he?
And
that would have been
my bet's been paid out already. So
nice. Has it? They've paid out on that.
Looking at the money markets. Just as a random one, the two favourites are unironically Javid and Zahawi.
Are they really?
They are, and Pippa Crerar just tweeted as well from the Guardian that the two favourites to come in as chancellors are two ex-chancellors.
Wow. Well, I've got a bit of a dark horse there. I mean, I don't know what the law is. I don't know what Ofcom does about people. You're not supposed to Okay, I'll have a look at that. So what do you think just reflect briefly then on what the bigger picture, as it were, rather than the fine detail of
like I said to the producer, I just kind of think that Truss is a leaf out of Boris's book, blame anyone and everyone else. She obviously, her and Kwasi were talked to by Tufton Street. They went down the policy, and now she's going, well, no, I've got rid of Kwasi. It was his idea. I mean, they already threw Philp under the bus and blamed the 45p.
Well, they didn't throw him under the bus, mate, because he's still in the job, isn't he? But they kind of tried to claim that it was all his fault, and then he said it wasn't me, Gov. It wasn't me. It's the shaggy school of politics that Boris Johnson sort of finessed, and they're all joining in with it wasn't me, Gov. So crikey, We'll catch up with Theo shortly, because now Operation Save Truss and Operation Save the Economy could arguably have become the same thing. Ollie, thank you, mate. Let's go up to the other end of the country. Scott's in Glasgow. Scott, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah, basically, I think what they'll do is they will try and stack shore up Truss with the two divides from the Truss camp and the Sunak camp. Just for the reason to try and bring in a little bit of stability to get them through the next couple of months, or even all the way to the general election in 2 years' time, if they can actually do that.
But they all hate each other now, don't they?
I know. Yeah, well, no, they do. But I just think they are thinking about have to start thinking about the party and actually doing things for the party and not just for themselves, which I know it's quite hard for a politician to do. But that's that. Yeah, that's my take
I'm
on
not
it.
even sure. So the Sunak loyalists, Shaps. Where did Jeremy Hunt go once he stepped out of the leadership election himself? He must have gone with Sunak rather than Truss, mustn't he?
He must have gone with Sunak.
Tom Tugendhat's thinking at the moment for coming out in favour of Truss, when for a moment he was the king across the water, wasn't he? They're not going to make any other changes. They're only going to hire a chancellor, and if that involves promoting someone already in the cabinet, they need to bring someone in to replace that job. It's all to play for. What I mean. Views on the general picture, views on the bigger picture. This, because I do this for a living, so I can get excited, and people listening to this, hopefully, I can communicate that we can all get excited, because we're all a bit more interested in politics, perhaps, than people who don't listen to programs like this. But when that sugar rush subsides, it's just awful.
It is, and then up here, the other thing I have to worry about is obviously independence and stuff like that, because it's playing totally into their hands completely, I think it's bad with the mini budget. Think how bad it would be if there was a vote next year.
The numbers do not support a lot of the rhetoric and the fear, but I guess the more chaos there is, the harder it becomes to argue that you shouldn't unhitch yourself from the source of the chaos, doesn't it?
Yeah, there is some logic in that, but I think it'd be 10 times worse. Like Brexit was bad enough, completely and utterly. But
don't blow up my switchboard. We're not launching an independence conversation.
No. Yeah, I think it'd just be 10 times worse just for the.
And I shall allow that to pass as a concluding comment on the bigger picture about the UK. But I won't be taking anybody refuting it or challenging it or disagreeing with it, because that's not the conversation that we're having today. Speaking of refuting and challenging and disagreeing, the date today, I should remind you, in case you need me to, is the 14th of October 2022. On the 22nd of September 2022, in expectation of Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget, the Daily Mail comment, so this is the voice of the newspaper, wrote, when Kwasi Kwarteng delivers his mini-budget today, it promises not only to be the most significant fiscal occasion in decades, it might be the moment conservatism awakens from its coma. Under recent Tory governments, the party has shifted from free market principles and instead slumped into the big state treasury orthodoxy that drove the tax burden to an 80-year high. Thankfully, the Chancellor and Prime Minister Liz Truss are determined to re-energise the country by taking a more radical approach, turbocharging growth. The only positive is that when you're writing a leader for the comment pages, you don't have to put your name on it. But the name of the editor of the Daily Mail is Ted Verity. And he would not only have signed off on this, he would have essentially commissioned it as well. Thankfully, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, are determined to re-energise the country by taking a more radical approach, turbocharging growth. So if your mum or dad buy that newspaper, just remind them that if this was governed by Advertising Standards Authority or any form of regulator, then there would be a very strong case for being able to get a refund for all the newspapers you'd bought over the last 20 years. Thankfully, the Chancellor and Prime Minister Liz Truss are determined to re-energise the country by taking a more radical approach. Speaking of Daily Mail editors, the previous incumbent but one, Paul Dacre, has been removed from the list of people set to get peerages after objections from the House of Lords Selection Committee. I suspect, the establishment being what it is, that will be reversed by Christmas. But in the meantime, I said a lot of people suggesting there isn't any good news today, and I was being sarcastic, obviously, when I suggested that city bonuses rising twice as fast as workers' wages might constitute good news. But Paul Dacre getting a raspberry in his face, you'd have to be made of stone not to let that put a smile on your fizzog. Michael is in Stansted. Michael, just overviews, no prizes. What do you reckon?
Well, I said to your researcher, I've just come back from a short break in Granada in Spain.
Very nice.
And yeah, lovely. And travelling through, landing in Malaga and great airport, great trains, and into the centre of the city and seeing vibrant cities, and then a train up to Granada and go around the Alhambra, seeing the energy and the vibrancy and the kindness and friendliness of every single person I met, and the families out of an evening, it all felt a very long way away from coming back today. It felt a different world, and upon my return, you're back into that bump.
Well, sort of. I mean, it's not long ago that the women's football team had the whole country dancing in the streets. I enjoyed your poetic reportage, your travel journalism, but you're describing familial happiness. You're not describing a sort of opposite of political turmoil. I'm looking out of the studio window on the 8th floor here in Birmingham, and I'm seeing, sunlight and sunshine, and I might go down and look at Tony DeVitt's new plaque outside the custard factory in Digbeth later. I pop into the aquarium or something. There's lots of stuff to be happy about, mate. It's just that politics is on fire.
But if you're talking about, I liked what you said before, how do you feel?
Yes.
And after, from 2016, to sit and to grind away at Twitter and grind away at all the things and all the work, the good work you do, to see where they've brought us.
Yeah, all right. I can't argue with this.
To see where we are today, to see what we're talking about, the trajectory from the Brexit decision, and to see it now. We all said what would happen. We said where we'd end up, and now we end up in this car crash of markets and car crash of politics and division that was created at that time. And to be away from it, to step out of it for those moments, and to be in the European Union and be welcomed. Why did we do this? What was this all for? What have we achieved? Where did it take us? Where did it take us as a people or politically, when what we're now going to see is another PM is going to leave us? Yeah. That will happen.
It has to, doesn't it? It can't see. It has to go now.
It will. We will find ourselves again with a new proposal of a temporary PM who will have to go to the public, have to go to get a real mandate. So we'll have a real battle for a new election, and we'll see them turfed out. And from 2016 now, we'll end up with a majority Labour government, and we'll see the Tories all navel gaze for the next few years. What was it for, James? What the hell was all of this for? So that sense of anger and anguish I feel now of all the lies and people they tricked and all the things that were said and the citizenship they took away from me and my children. And to be in Europe yesterday, I look at it and just feel that deep deep sadness of the way people behaved and the lies that were told.
And of course, one has to imagine that the boneheaded claim that the sadness of people like you was the justification for Brexit, which, if you mentioned Twitter, which is a popular position on social media and beyond, it gets into the comment pages of the Daily Telegraph and other sewers. Surely now they must realise what they've done.
It's just for ordinary people.
Yeah.
I chatted with a group of people talking about rents in Granada. A family are renting a place for £800, stable rents in good properties with disposable income. And I look at what we're doing with food banks in the UK, and I think the promise, you can imagine, can't you? We both would have had to have said that if Boris had come in and Brexit had gone well and we'd been given a trade deal with America, we'd be eating humble pie. We'd be sat here eating away our humble pie. And yet we all said, but this can't happen. Yeah. You're fantasists. You're living in fantasy. And now to see this wooden top and Kwarteng, who are about to expire, you step back. You're there yesterday, I returned today, and I see this news, and I think to myself, I was only gone 4 days.
Yeah.
I hadn't travelled the world. I hadn't gone on a long cruise.
No.
I'd been away for 4 days. I come back and I see this woman who's going to have to stand there today. It's not that the centre of her party and the left of her party will sit today and say, well, you listen to us. She's now got the 100 of the Praetorian Guard of the right who are going to say, oh, you've let us down. So the letters are going to fly in, statements will be made, she will be turfed out, Kwarteng will go, they'll try and bring in a continuity candidate and they'll go to the people because nothing else makes any sense.
Well, nothing has made sense, though, as you remind us, since that ludicrous project succeeded in 2016. But you have to be right. If not today, then soon, when the penny drops on such a scale that almost nobody can ignore it. That was, if you'd allow me to say, Michael, that was really beautifully put. Actually,
this isn't a 2024. This isn't 2024 and an election, James. No,
it can't be, can it? Who knows? No, you're right.
There's no way. The political commentators, the markets, everyone's now staring at a vacuum, at a complete vacuum of a party that can't even have a conversation with itself. And the right will now rail against what has been done. And more lies will try to be put. But the centrist will pull together to say, we will go to the country.
Is enough. Michael, thank you. And you moved me, actually, with a lot of that analysis. And it speaks to what I struggle to describe sometimes. It speaks to genuine patriotism, not the patriotism of hating foreigners or Farage's filthy posters, but the patriotism of wanting your best for your country and everybody in it. And these people have, sometimes perhaps unwittingly or with good intentions, but sometimes with no concern whatsoever for the country or the people who live in it, have gone in the opposite direction at 100 miles an hour for 6 years now. And what Michael reminds us of so powerfully and so poetically is that all of this was predictable. If you build something on buttons, sand, lies, nonsense, xenophobia, exceptionalism, fantasy, if you build on that, however big you build and however beautiful the building may appear to true believers, it will always be built on nonsense. The unicorns will never arrive. There is no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And all we're seeing now, everything we're seeing now, is a direct consequence of a country falling under the spell of liars like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage and Andrea Leadsom and Mark Francois and Andrew Bridgen and Digby Pudding-Jones and John Redwood and Daniel Hannan and Daniel Moylan and Zach Goldsmith and Claire Fox and Kate Hoey and all the rest of them who told you that unicorns existed. And now their own party, in the case of most of those characters, their own party are learning the consequences of unicorns being undeliverable. I know some people still won't like that analysis, but it doesn't stop it being true. It's 12:21. It is 25 minutes after 12. Speaking of that despicable individual, Nigel Farage, you remember what he tweeted on the 23rd of September? Today was the best Conservative budget since 1986. I think you're going to have to start asking yourself how you could fall for the nonsense spouted by people like that. You're going to have to, aren't you? You owe it to yourself, never mind the future, never mind your country. Honestly, no pleasure at all in being proved absolutely right about events, about individuals, about any of this, because it's as Michael just reminded us, it's utterly heartbreaking. But there's someone who was put on Question Time almost as often as David Dimbleby, given newspaper columns, invited into radio studios. Utterly stupid, ignorant beyond belief. Today was the best Conservative budget since 1986. He'll be back to Dover soon with his Fisher-Price binoculars to try to distract you with the game of pretending that desperate human beings are somehow deserving of your contempt. I'll tell you who's deserving of your contempt. Him. I'll tell you who isn't. Theo Usherwood. Hello, mate.
Hi, just to bring you up to date and just to sort of perhaps this sacking of Kwasi Kwarteng, and he has been pictured going into Downing Street, shouldn't come as a massive surprise. And I say that, James, because immediately after the mini budget, and I had the conversations with people in number 10 Downing Street, and it's important to make that distinction, Liz Truss and her team were fully supportive of the Chancellor and the mini budget that had been delivered. However, yesterday it was picking up that they were starting to circle the firing squad towards the Chancellor and the way that he managed the mini budget. Two particular points to this. Now, there are caveats to this. The first is that it was Liz Truss's decision during the campaign to be Conservative Prime Minister that she said she would not provide any costings to the Office for Budget Responsibility. That happened during the campaign itself. She would not provide those. So there was no scrutiny of the numbers, and that was something we know spooked the markets. However, the point that was being made to me was that Kwasi Kwarteng went further than what was actually contained within Liz Truss's leadership campaign, and the markets were prepared when it came to the reversal on or the freezing of the corporation tax rise from 19 pence to 25 pence, and they were prepared when it came to reversing the national insurance for both employers and employees by 1.25 percentage points, which was brought in last April. What they weren't prepared for, and this is from somebody who's very well versed on the Prime Minister's thinking when it comes to the economy, they weren't prepared for the stamp duty cut, and they weren't prepared for the abolition of the 45p additional rate of tax for those earning more than £150,000. Now, I don't tell you this story by way of trying to, in effect, let Liz Truss off the hook or trying to make excuses for the Prime Minister. What I'm saying is that there did seem to be, in the last couple of days, trying to put clear blue water between number 10 and number 11, and that actually the unity that had been displayed, because Liz Truss sat next to Kwasi Kwarteng throughout that mini budget. She endorsed it. Her team endorsed it. They stood foursquare behind the decisions when it came to even making the U-turn on the 45p rate. Was that I think what's happening now somewhat is a save Liz Truss operation. And your earlier caller was talking about the possibility of a general election, and I would expect that to become, you to hear more of that, but not from necessarily your callers to your show, James, but hear that from supporters or people who tacitly support Liz Truss, because they'll be making the point that if the Conservative Party were to change its leader for the third time in 3 years, and you were to end up in a situation where you were to have three Conservative prime ministers off the back of one general election, then you'd have to go back to the country. That government wouldn't have any legitimacy.
Unsustainable. Although once again we find ourselves applying rules of normalcy and precedent to a political situation that has not followed the rules of normality or precedent now for the best part of half a decade. So I have to go to the news. Thank you. It's 12:30 and Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. The time is 12:34. The Chancellor is toast. The policies upon which Liz Truss got herself elected as leader of the Conservative Party and therefore Prime Minister are due to be abandoned. And the bloke that she beat in that battle is to see his economic platform, his economic policies reinstalled, even as he isn't even in government. Oh, great. Chris is impressed with it. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
We're now at the stage where we have a government who can no longer think of the country. We went from a Prime Minister in Partygate thinking of one person to a Prime Minister thinking about the needs of 81,000 voters in a leadership competition. And now we've got a parliamentary party of 356 looking inwards on how they can save the party. So
and their own jobs, as many of their own jobs as possible. In the mix.
It's either general election time, so she announces that today, or I'm kind of the.
And she fights it herself. I can't see that. I mean, good God, all bets are off, aren't they? She's not going to try and fight a general election herself.
Well, I don't see many other options, and the only other thing would be to take the decision out of the Conservatives' hands and have a dissolution of government, which I would like to see, and I'm pretty sure.
I think they'll have one more roll of the
dice.
One more roll of the dice. They try and install, without a leadership election, they try and install one more leader. I mean, she might try and style it out, and then it's a question, as it was for the last year of Boris Johnson's premiership, whether anyone is going to, A, have the guts to launch a coup of sorts, and B, have the support to follow through on it. I think the second bit would be certain, and you'd think that the second bit being certain would make the first bit a no-brainer, wouldn't you? There's, no way that could fail, unless they can't get support behind whatever the alternative would be, whatever the consensus would be.
Yeah. Either way, I think the brand of conservatism and the Conservative Party is completely poisoned, and it has been for a long time. It's
been poisoned since Brexit, and lots of Conservatives would admit that, albeit not in public. I don't know what the way back is for them any more than I know what the way back is for the country with regard to the single market. Does it affect Scottish independence conversations as much as some people suggest?
Well, I think if we had a change of leader who used the phrase, we share these islands, then that might change some opinions.
Nicely put, yeah.
And if we could then be more collaborative, my understanding is Liz Truss hasn't spoken to either Mark Drakeford or Nicola Sturgeon, so
she can't wash her hands of any of this, can she?
Nah,
it's all very well sacking Kwasi Kwarteng, and Theo's analysis that there were some things he was responsible for more personally than she was is just. I mean, who would be sitting? They actually had 9% approval last night on a poll that I saw, and the way my brain works, Chris, I'm thinking, who the hell are they? I'm not thinking about wow, that's low. I'm thinking, how can anyone think? I mean, who would still be there now? Who would still, apart possibly from Chris Akabusi?
And then the other question would be, how much further can we go lower before we hit rock bottom?
And what is rock bottom? Every time you think you can't go any lower up, they come with a spade.
Oh, God, please. No, please. I hope we're almost there.
You have to hope so, and it's going to be the Conservatives who pulled a chain on that, as it were.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Take it easy. Yeah, well, yes, you said that, not me. Just by way of light relief, before we talk to Sylvia in Westminster, I have to tell you that I'm fairly confident that The Economist newspaper and the Daily Star have never collaborated journalistically before, albeit unofficially, but they're collaborating in a rather beautiful way at the moment. You'll remember there was a absolutely stinging column in The Economist earlier this week that described Liz Truss as having the shelf life of a lettuce, something that is becoming more pertinent by the minute. But the Daily Star, which has it's rediscovered that tabloid, that red top tabloid gift for comedy that used to be very much part of the genre. The Daily Star has run with this description from The Economist, and they now have a live feed of a lettuce and a picture of Liz Truss, waiting to see which one falls first. Will the lettuce succumb to nature and to rotting, or will Liz Truss's premiership implode? We are literally watching to see which has the shorter shelf life, Liz Truss's premiership or a wet lettuce. And kudos to the Daily Star for running that, and I'm fairly confident, although you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that the Economist and the Daily Star have never before collaborated journalistically in any way, shape or form. Kwasi Kwarteng's still in Downing Street, so I have to tell you, if he does come out and say anything, we will endeavour to cross live to that, albeit that I'm in an unfamiliar studio. Sylvia is in Westminster. Sylvia, what would you like to say?
Thank you for having me on, James.
You're very welcome.
Basically, I think Kwasi has just basically, carried the can for all of Liz Truss's policy mistakes. It was, throughout I didn't go to any of the huskings. I literally just listened to a couple of things she was saying, things that they put out on Twitter, and knew straight away she had no concept. For someone who was allegedly an accountant, had no concept of basic economic understanding, because what she was spouting on about during the campaign would as basic economics, it just didn't make any sense. And then when they came in and actually did it, it was even more bizarre. It was just...
Yes, you thought, that's a very odd promise built upon absolute nonsense, but they won't actually do it, will they? She's just saying what the crowd wants to hear in order to get the big job. And then, lo and behold, in they come into...
She actually came in. I mean,
Are you a member of the party, Sylvia?
I was.
You were.
And then after all the Boris shenanigans, I just said enough is enough.
Fair enough.
And my membership literally got me to vote for Rishi, and that was it.
It expired in the aftermath of the hustings.
Exactly. I was in the 90-day grace period that they give you, and I voted for Rishi. And I kept on saying, because I meet local members quite often, and you listen to them, and some of them were still saying, oh, they didn't, Boris shouldn't have gone, and I kept on saying to them, Liz is mad. She's literally, what she's saying just doesn't make any sense. She's literally bonkers. I hope I can say that.
Well, you have now. That's fine. I would rather you described her behaviour rather than herself. But this is me
her
being
behaviour. Her behaviour.
Yes.
And she has this. I don't know. I don't know. She even if there's something serious, her expressions and her mannerisms. She just has this. She just bounds along, and there's no substance to it. They keep on. And the other thing that really annoys me is when presenters have ministers on and they say, yes, but we have this growth plan. What is the growth plan? What are you going to grow? Is it mushrooms? Is it
pies?
Onions?
Pies.
Is it pies?
She's growing pies.
Cheese? What are you growing?
Yes.
Yesterday on Radio 4, they had James Cleverly on, and he was like, yes, but we've got the growth plan. Yes, but tell me, does that growth plan in the short term, what does it give you? Does it give you 0.5% growth? Or what does it give you in a year's time? What is your projections? Just to keep saying that they've got this.
You mentioned personnel is crucial. I'm not sure James Cleverly, who seems like a nice enough bloke, I'm not sure he can lace his own shoes, let alone offer up a detailed analysis of an economic policy that's been built entirely out of magic beans.
No, it's all sound bites. And that's what, a lot of the presenters, the best thing that happened recently was when she was challenged by all those local...
reporters, you're absolutely right, the BBC regional reporters.
Exactly.
I'm in the LBC's Birmingham office at the the I'm quite happy to say that regional reporters are brilliant, Sylvia. We love regional reporters. It's we only get the dregs and the backwash washing up to the capital. The real talent is in the regions. No doubt about that. There it is. Unbelievable.
Okay.
What happens next?
I think she'll be gone by Christmas, but we have to have a general election. They cannot force another prime minister on us. We have to have a general election. This is not sustainable.
You wouldn't have thought so, would you?
If they don't, then they rightly should be wiped out at the next general election.
It's up to the Tory party again, though. What happens next?
It is.
Oh boy, Sylvia, thank you. I sense that you feel you've got a lot off your chest there.
I did.
Good.
Thank you, James.
No, thank you. There is some fun to be had in working out tenures. Brian Clough lasted longer at Leeds than Kwasi Kwarteng did at the Treasury. My favourite that I just spotted on Twitter is that David Blaine lasted longer in that glass box in Trafalgar Square than Kwasi Kwarteng did. That's the Chancellor. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's 12:44. 12:48 is the time. The TV broadcasters keep returning to that camera positioned permanently outside number 10 Downing Street in expectation, perhaps, of Kwasi Kwarteng having something to say when he comes out. Faisal Islam at the BBC, the economics editor, who's been on these patches for a long time and has impeccable contacts, tweeting that from what he knows personally of Kwasi Kwarteng, he is very unlikely to go quietly, to sort of carry the can. So there could be more fireworks on the way today, and even perhaps before I hand over to Sheila in 10 minutes, if he does step out of that door anytime soon. And Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng reportedly very close to each other on a personal and political level for many years. So that particular defenestration is going to have been discomforting, one imagines, to say the least. Quick word on the 9% that sustain or retain support for Liz Truss and my bafflement at what possible planet they inhabit. Do you remember Susan Hall, the leader of the Conservatives on the Greater London Assembly, who tweeted shortly after Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget that it must be good because I hated it? That would be me, James O'Brien. So a genuine politician, quite a senior one in regional terms, leader of the Conservatives on the Greater London Assembly, the chair, no less, of the Police and Crime Committee, tweeting that it must be a good budget because James O'Brien on the radio is tearing it to shreds, or words to that effect. She's there. She's tweeted last night, actually, I am a true Tory. I voted for Liz Truss and I will always be loyal to our leader. I'm sick to death of the infighting. Support Liz or leave the party because you are destroying our brand if you don't. In addition, our country, which has a capital C for some reason, needs stability more than ever before, which is a combination both of witlessness and word salad that would win awards if such awards existed. Back to the phones. Phil's in Scarborough. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Based on what you said a couple of months ago,
Go on.
that until the people who voted Brexit put their arms up and say it's a mistake, we can't start to fix the problem. You remember saying that a couple of times. You might have said that.
I have. It's not going to. You think it's going to happen? I'm not sure it's going to happen yet.
Okay, this is just in my muddy waters. Conversations have already been had, and I think within a week, a group of Tory MPs that voted Brexit will make a joint statement that Brexit was a mistake, and that we'll see before Christmas then.
All right. Wait, what are you going to do? Move the goalposts every time I speak?
No, before Christmas is my final
I think they kick
answer.
it. Final answer. You didn't even phone a friend. I think what's going to happen next week, and oddly, as I prepared to say this, Nick Watt, the political editor of Newsnight, has tweeted it. Next week, you're going to have some fairly big beasts calling for Truss to go, calling for Truss to resign. Whether or not that translates into letters, which was what did for Boris Johnson, that will happen next week. I don't think that Brexit gets disowned until another cycle, another electoral cycle. There's nothing to be gained from it. There's nothing we can do. We can't rejoin. If we ever did rejoin fully, we'd have to undertake the single currency, which the Tory party in particular is going to be allergic to. You're looking at EFTA or EEA style membership at some point in the hopefully not too distant future. But that, of course, would render us precisely the thing they lied about as being in the first place, which would be rule takers rather than rule makers. So I wish you were right, Phil. You know I do, but I don't think you are, mate.
Right, I'll hold you to it.
All right, you're on. Call it 50,
Okay.
50p, a 50p postal order.
50p.
All right, you're on. I'll take that, but I'll see your 50p, pal. That's a joke, by the way. I'm not allowed to place bets or make wagers live on the radio. Phil, thank you. Have a great weekend. Lewis is in Putney, one of our sages, one of our most... well, I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but what's going on?
I was going to say, I don't think this will be on there. I'm going with a very out there response because I was walking around Wandsworth Park for lunch, and I was thinking, what would I do if I was listening to your call, if I was a marginal Conservative MP? And I was thinking, what's the get out? And I came up with bring in a man who has a mandate, who can beat Labour.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh no!
Because the party is going to get destroyed as things stand by Labour. There's no way around it. And Liz has no power. So the only option, if I was in a marginal for a Conservative MP, would be to bring back Boris.
Yeah. I mean, his ability to defy reality is, of course, what explains both his political career and his survival for so long. Liz Truss's political premiership, at least, appears to be over precisely because she couldn't defy reality with the force of her delusional rhetoric. Johnson possibly still could. I think it would probably be I don't know whether it translates into seats on the ground, but it would be a less cataclysmic defeat, wouldn't it, if he was in the chair, because he retains sort of a weird popularity among people, a populist popularity.
Well, he was beating both Truss and Sunak in the hustings.
Only among members, and look what the members just did. I don't know what his approval ratings are like across the country.
I think you'd still see it across the country, though. I remember you had a.
But he wouldn't be as low as Truss. No, he was low, mate. That was a large part of the reason why they got rid of him. I mean, they could forgive him anything while he was popular, but I mean, listen, it's a view. I don't think it's your finest contribution to the programme, but that might come back to haunt me, Lewis. Who knows? And then he's got the problem of the Privileges Committee investigation into whether or not he lied to the House of Commons when he lied to the House of Commons.
Well, yeah, he did lie, so that is
How dare you preempt the conclusions of the Privileges Committee's investigation on Lewis into whether or not he lied to the House of Commons when he lied to the House of Commons? We'll have to wait and see. And that could do him forever. I mean, he could be out of Parliament. I know you feel the same way. I just can't see any improvement to the body politic being brought about by resurrecting Boris Johnson. And yet, of course, 6 years, if we've learned anything, it's people who are angry and don't understand anything but think they're winning will continue to do really stupid things in the belief that they're winning. Lewis, thank you. David's in Durham. David, what's going on?
Well, I think we're in danger here of what's going on, of rewriting Rishi Sunak. We seem to be in a situation where people are making the case that if we just go back to what Rishi was doing, everything will be fine.
Yeah.
We were in a deep mess before this self-inflicted injury from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. So just going back to Rishi doesn't solve the problem.
No, you make a very good point. There's a danger of king across the water syndrome kicking in here, isn't there? But we've been speaking very specifically about the mini budget, and he was clear about what would happen in the event of these policies being introduced, and he has been vindicated pretty gloriously.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was definitely clear about it. And I mean, let's face it, we're in a situation now where one of the favourite phrases in Brexit was Brino. We've now got Pimino, Prime Minister in name only. Because the people around her are telling her what to do. She has absolutely no authority at all.
Is there a precedent for this? I can't think of a precedent for this level of unhinged or unhitchedness.
I can't think of one, but I can think of one other precedent that the Tory party will be looking at quite severely, and that was Theresa May went into a general election with a considerable lead and totally fell apart during the examination of an election. And I don't think any of us could see Liz Truss standing up to the examination of a general election.
No, you make a point.
So if they have any...
They can't fight the next election with her
winning a general election, she can't lead them into it.
And then, I wonder psychologically... Thank you, David. I do wonder psychologically whether the scale of the Labour lead in some ways helps Liz Truss, because the Tories will be thinking, well, it can't get any worse. We can't go now because they're 20-odd, 30-odd points ahead in the polls. It can't possibly get worse than that. So we may as well hang on to her until things get a bit better. Oh, dear. Al's in Worcester Park, with what will probably be the last word of the week on my watch. Al, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
You're a hard man to track down.
Oh, you're here now.
I think this is the end for the Tories, to be honest. I can't see them getting through to the next election. I mean, Truss, she's blown any political credibility.
It's
that
breathtaking
she had.
how quickly and how completely that's happened, isn't it? I mean, truly breathtaking.
Yeah, it is. I think they obviously have some issue of getting new blood into the party. I mean, that front bench, and I don't mean this in any disrespect to teachers or their profession, but that is not a front bench. It's, it resembles a teacher staff room. I mean,
hang on, that's deeply disrespectful to teachers and their profession. We could have gone for something else like a scarecrow convention.
Well, let's put it this way then. They're like a petrol tank that's run out of petrol and the sludge at the bottom of the tank is starting to filter its way through the fuel pipes. Let's put it like that. Then.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm not a big motoring man, but that sounds very impressive and persuasive. How long? What do you reckon then? Give it a week? Give it a fortnight? Next week you're going to see big beasts calling for her to go, and I can't see how she can resist that. But what happens after that is anybody's guess.
Completely. I think we're looking at a Labour government. I think we're looking at a total change. I think the country has finally become so disillusioned with the Tory party and the way they operate that I think the country is now ready for complete change. I mean, for a woman that models herself, and I've heard many of your callers this morning mention Thatcher.
Yeah.
I mean, like her or not, there is absolutely no comparison. I mean, Margaret Thatcher was.
Well, you give me a lovely opportunity to remind people of one of Margaret Thatcher's most famous pronouncements, which anybody who saw Liz Truss as an heir to her would probably quite enjoy being reminded of. Should we just remind ourselves of that little clip that we played out earlier? Here it is.
I was waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn. I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
And I'll leave you with this thought for the weekend. If Liz Truss had decided in her 20s as a passionate Liberal Democrat that she was going to infiltrate the Conservative Party and become leader in order to screw it up completely from the inside, how do you think she might have behaved differently over the last month? Have a great weekend. Here's Sheila Fogarty. 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 Here's Sheila Fogarty.